Hey, everybody, good afternoon. It is Dr. Lisa. How are you guys doing today? Oh, I am tired, but I am so ready to talk to you about Blog 5. This is Happy Hour with Dr. Lisa, and I hope you guys have your wine or your beer today because I certainly have a glass of wine next to me. It's red and it's good. Long day. So, there's so much to talk about. I want to make sure that you are still asking your questions. There are a lot of them coming in, and I certainly do appreciate it. Um, my email address is kidscanseeghosts@gmail.com. So I do check that email, and if you have them, make sure that you let me know your questions so that I can answer them either via email or on air. You can also ask questions while I'm on air. So sometimes I am sitting here and my friends are texting me questions, interrupting me like they are now. And I'm like, stop asking me questions on my cell phone and put them on, Podbean or send them to my email because I can't really focus, guys. My Google Voice number is 765-205-1959. Again, that is 765-205-1959. Hey, I was told that I have a radio voice, that I have a sexy radio voice. So I'm going to try to sound like I have a sexy radio voice today. That just cracked me up when a couple of people told me that. So this is my sexy radio voice. Being silly today. So let's get started. This blog today is going to be a continuation from Volume 10, which was adapted from my blog 5 on my website, lisaligginschambers.com. And that blog was written so that you would get an idea of how I unraveled the truth about these nebulous children. So again, I've met a lot of children throughout the years who can see ghosts, and I decided to coin the term nebulous children. And if you listen to earlier podcasts, or if you read the blogs, you will understand my rationale behind calling these children nebulous. Alrighty, last week we went into detail about my experiences working for a medical college in Nashville, Meharry Medical College, and what led me to write my master's thesis, and which employee I felt close to and learned from him. That story, if you missed it, is on the previous blog, which would be, it was Volume 9. That's right, Volume 9. And then you'll get an idea of how learning from him shaped me into who I was when I dealt with nebulous children, but also who I am today. Some people come into your life and they're just very powerful. Okay. So let's take all that you learned about me last week and travel to the City of Wind, which is one of my favorite cities to live in. I was there actually about 2 weeks ago in Chicago. And I just have to say, if you are from Chicago and you are listening, I still can't get over how blue Lake Michigan is. I've said that. Lake Michigan, if you haven't seen it, it looks just like the Caribbean Ocean almost. It's amazing. And I grew up in close to Lake Erie. So Lake Erie still, I'm hearing from some of my friends from home that they still have some cleaning up to do. So they should take a point or two from, the state of Illinois and deal with that water. Lake Erie should be blue like Lake Michigan. So when I got to Chicago, it was about 2001. And that is when I started working on my doctorate degree. So I was accepted into a couple of programs, but I chose to pursue my doctorate with the Illinois Institute of Technology under the leadership of Dr. Robert Slesser, who is no longer with us. He died a couple of years ago. So my learning was divided between what all of my wonderful professors taught me during my matriculation at the Illinois Institute of Technology on the South Side, getting into the South Side. So it was 35th, I believe, over by King Drive. So Bob was my advisor. I was in a cohort with some wonderful peers, my peers and classmates, some of whom I still keep in contact with. And some of the ones that were younger than me, much younger, who came in, I keep in contact with them as well. So Chicago, when I started the program, what was interesting about that is along the way, as some of my peers and I had gotten to know each other, there have been a few who discussed being able to see ghosts. And so when I talk to you about these things, understand that over time, I was almost being prepared to work with these children. So again, this is not something that just happened because I said, yeah, I'm going to study kids who see ghosts. Or I am going to read this book about kids who see ghosts. Or I'm going to talk to other people and pastors about kids who see ghosts. No, that's not how it happened. When I look back over the course of 20 years, I was completely being trained to work with these kids, although that was not what I had intended on doing when I was in graduate school. So while I was a graduate student, some of my peers then talked about having the ability to see ghosts and share with me quite a bit about what some of these things mean. So I had some knowledge back then. I have a relative, more than one, who can actually see ghosts. So I heard about it, but when I was younger, I was kind of like, whatever. I don't necessarily feed into, stuff that I can't see. So when I started my program, I may have been about 32 years old. So even as a younger child, I started hearing about, the ability of people who can see ghosts. So when I got to graduate school and worked on my PhD, well, here it was again, some of the other students were talking to me about it. So they were kind of telling me what dark spirits versus light spirits mean, what are angels and demons, and how all of this goes together. Now, I've always been interested in it because I think it's a phenomenal topic. It's not something that everyone can do. So it's just like so many people are now asking me questions about what is it like to be a psychologist? Do you ever get worn out? Do you ever hate your clients? Do you love your clients? Well, what happens if I fall in love with my therapist? It's the same curiosity. So I asked a lot of questions. So for example, I'll tell you a couple of things that I wrote in the blog if you didn't read those things, and then I'll expand upon them. So one of the things that collectively, my peers would say to me is that anything dark was demonic. And so you have to stay away from, either back then, this was the thinking, kids that see dark spirits or demons, or if you encounter dark spirits or demons or anything dark is in relation to demonic forces, anything that is angelic, it's more of God's angels. So these are the things that I'm listening to back then from my peers. And some of them talked about how, they knew other people who had this ability. And sometimes these things would follow, their peers to school and make them do really negative things or behave badly in school or poorly. And what's interesting about that is, I think back to my own childhood and thinking about some of the things that, people had gotten caught up into when we were younger. And so when you start hearing these things, at least for me, from a psychological perspective, you start trying to put it together because I'm like, wait a minute, I've heard kids tell me, that these demons follow them on a school bus and tell them to hit other kids. And I'm like, whoa, how many times have I said that a kid had oppositional defiant disorder, once I became a psychologist, and maybe some of this was behind it. I don't know, and I don't have evidence of it, of course, but it kind of makes you start thinking, collecting data, processing some of the kids you've worked with, how much of this is a part of, their mindset. And so the students would tell me they would follow them home, that all of us are always surrounded by spirits. Some of us have the veil lifted, some don't. It's good because if you don't, then you won't be frightened by what you see. So I learned about more details about this from them. Of course, they were adults, and then some of them would also tell me how they learned to control their ability. Now, that was interesting to me. And I actually remember sitting in a part of the building, one of the buildings, the cafeteria. And I remember some of these conversations. Obviously, I can never reveal who told me, but now that I process it, I can remember certain things like, being in the cafeteria and being a nice sunshiny day and eating lunch and listening to stories and then, applying what I learned in the public and asking more questions. So as I talk, sometimes some of these things start coming back to me too. And I remember hearing, that people have the ability to control this kind of gift, right? And so later on in the blog, I talk about how parents even taught me that this ability can be controlled. You don't have to see things all the time. You don't have to deal with demons all the time. And so there are ways to help children learn how to control it. So I graduated, I think in 2005. I'm old. I have to look at my Vita now to know when I graduated, but I believe it was 2005. And eventually I wound up moving to, over time, to St. Louis. And let's talk about St. Louis. I love St. Louis too. It's such a great place to raise a family. And I've lived in St. Louis twice. So I can say that, and I have a lot of information there about all kinds of things, from schools to real estate to everything. And so, I'm going to start talking about St. Louis a lot more going forward. On this podcast, but also on the blog, because I took everything I learned from my doctorate program and eventually moved back to St. Louis. And that is where I spent the most time getting to know Nebulous Children. So although I met quite a few people in Chicago, I was only in Chicago about 8.5 years. St. Louis, having lived there twice, of course, I met a lot more people. So what happened was all of the learning from different pastors, all of the learning from my peers, all of the learning from various people in different congregations at churches, all of that stuff that I took with me to St. Louis. And this is the second time that I lived in St. Louis after I got my doctorate. So I went from Chicago to Champaign, Illinois, and in Champaign, Illinois, all the way to St. Louis again. So this is St. Louis after Champaign, Illinois. So I was much older, wiser, a lot more seasoned with regard to treatment for psychological impairments. And I had some knowledge about how to work with these babies. So I remember one of my first experiences in St. Louis. It frightened me so badly that I actually went to a pastor and talked to him about it. And that's when I already told you that he told me about, how a demon sits in front of his lectern, and, how the child, one of his kids can see angels, and, and then I went back to one of my clients who actually saw some of the same things that my pastor saw. So we talked about that. But one of the other things that I didn't mention to you was that this pastor was also told by members of the congregation privately that they were able to see ghosts as well. So some of the angels that were seen by my clients, and my clients did not attend this church, not. But somehow they knew where those demons were in the church and the angels. So a lot of this is really phenomenal and amazing, because to this day, I still don't know how some of those clients knew things, for example, like that about a church that they've never even visited. My understanding at the time was that you have to be in a certain place to understand or to see things. For example, they would have to go to church and just look around and like, oh, okay, that's Dr. Lisa's imagination, right? You have to be somewhere in order to see ghosts. So you just can't psychically tell me that this demon is in front of his lectern or there are angels in the pulpit, right? I'm thinking that you have to be present. And that's actually not the case, I learned. So that was new for me. And so ultimately what happened to me is, if you look at my picture and you picture me, this information would hit me over and over and over again. And mind you, it started in about 1995. So here we are at about, I guess, 2009. So for years, I kept getting the same stories from different people, different adults, different children, in different situations, over and over and over again. And the connection from them was phenomenal because none of them knew one another. None of them spoke to one another. Obviously, if they don't know each other, I can't breach confidentiality. That's against federal and state law. They didn't even see each other in the building one time. There were two kids who can see ghosts. One was leaving me and one was in their waiting room. That's it. But they did not know each other, and I can't reveal what just happened in one therapy session to another person. That would be a breach of confidentiality, especially because that kid saw the other one, if that makes sense. So I was hearing about this for a very long time, and it was starting to become very real to me. Very real. Because what do you do when all this information comes to you? So I started taking it seriously. I started to stop saying to myself that I needed to listen to these kids and families, but try to transition what they're saying, or trying to interpret it by way of mental health, meaning take symptoms and go straight to what I know from book knowledge. So using the DSM-5, we're at now, DSM-5. So that's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the 5th edition, which is what psychologists use to, diagnose various mental health challenges. And so it's kind of like, if you picture it, I had to toss all of that aside when I dealt with these kids to a certain degree, because you can't take away the mental health part of me, right? So, for example, if a kid was suicidal or had suicidal ideation or attempted to end his or her life, obviously, you can't ignore mental health. But what I had to do was get really savvy with regard to how I addressed their ability and distinguish that ability from their mental health, symptoms of mental health. I hope that makes sense. So every time I dealt with these kids going forward, I had to almost write 2 columns about them. One is the gift. What are the symptoms that they're having that lets me know that they have this gift other than what they told me? And how do I distinguish that from mental health? So on the mental health side, my checklist, my structured clinical interview that I do with parents and children, that all went on the right side. And then I had to tie it together to figure out how to help these children. And I have to tell you, 9 times out of 10, once they were taught how to control their gift, a lot of their symptoms, or what we call whatever category of mental health that they can fit in. For example, if it was depression, well, a lot of the symptoms that they had that would initially make me think that they had major depression started to go away. So in my mind, it was like, bingo, what is happening here? So I started to consult with a lot of other professionals, at various companies, other psychologists that I knew in the area, social workers. I started studying some more books by C.S. Lewis, and, all of this was a game changer for me. And so one of the things that, if you are going to work with these wonderful children, or you have to, according to this pastor, you have to start praying over yourself and your family, the company that you work for, because you are almost diving into what you can't see. And so according to this pastor and the pastor that I had in Chicago, and some parents and some other professionals that I know who understand this, and also according to various other people who can see things, like I remember I said the graduate students up in Chicago. Well, what happens is you have to guard yourself, because according to them, demons are deceptive and they do follow you and they are out to hurt you. So if they know that you are trying to help these kids, they won't like it. And let me backtrack for a second. The other set of graduate students I worked with is when I was teaching a general psychology class for a university outside of Chicago. And some of those students would it sounds so silly, but some of them will walk me to my cars, and I just really adore my students when I get them. And so I can remember stories that some of them would tell me, and some of them weren't ashamed to talk about this stuff in class. It would blow me away. So again, a long history of learning about this stuff. Long history. So as I had more encounters with nebulous children, it was imperative for me to understand it. I had to understand their ability, and I had to understand them, and I had to also understand their symptoms of mental health. Sometimes if they're in a crisis, I told you, well, if you read the blog, you'll read about a child that took us in a crisis once when I was on the south side of Chicago. So kids like that, I had to learn how to manage all of their symptoms. Okay. And so there are other things that I did, which might seem silly to some of you, but I really got into them. I started watching a lot of different shows about investigators who investigated ghosts. A lot of them, ironically, had psychologists working for their team as well, which I really got into because I thought, why does everyone have a psychologist with them when they are exploring different ghosts? Later on, I figured it out, and I also asked someone. I guess we are really good people to talk to and to have when you explore these things, to be able to do exactly what I just told you, distinguish between whether or not this is a real gift or whether or not they're faking. And guess what? We do have ways of knowing if people are truly experiencing what we call, some of us call faking bad, faking symptoms. So I guess that's why they had psychologists around. And recently I started watching one on, one of my girlfriends recommended to me. I believe it's on Netflix, and it's really good. It's a trio. And in that trio, one is a psychologist, and she's an atheist. And it's really interesting because they hired her because she is an atheist. And I thought, man, this is a good show. So I started watching those shows. Another one of my favorites was The Haunting. If you haven't watched that, I used to like Hollywood ghost stories. I really got into that. And even if you Google, celebrities who can see ghosts. It's a ton of them. So understand, my world was opening up. It was really opening up. Now I'm used to it. But back then I was like, oh my freaking God, people can actually do this. Like, it was overwhelming for me for a minute. And I am sure that some of you watch those shows as well. And so all of that stuff collectively inspired me and encouraged me to work with these children. Although to this day, I don't know why I was chosen to do it. What I do know is that I was so delighted to work with these babies. And there were some times when I didn't know how to help them at all. Yeah. There were times when I failed at working with some of these kids. I'm not perfect, and I never professed to be perfect, but there were times when I wasn't successful, and the part of that is when demons would tell kids not to work with me. Yeah. Some kids that I lost in therapy, and sometimes I would lose them when I was doing psychological testing. There is a certain something about me that can get kids talking. I swear to God, it's a gift. I don't know where it comes from, but when they would go home, and because remember, demons were never allowed in my office or around me or anyone anywhere near those kids when they were with me. When they would go home, some of these kids would come back. I'm thinking about one in particular, and I think it's child A, would tell me stuff like, the ghost told me not to talk to you. The ghost told me not to see you. The ghost told me I don't need you. They tell me they don't like you and that I shouldn't like you. And that I need to tell my parents that we don't need to see you anymore. And you know what would happen? What would happen is, and I don't know why the parents would do this, and it wasn't all of them, but a good number of them. Too many for me. Even if it was 3, that's too many. But what they would do is believe the child. Yeah. They would believe these kids. So they believed that they could see ghosts, mothers more than the dads. Some of the dads could see themselves, or they understood. But what they would do is they would cave to what these kids wanted, which of course, that's problematic within itself. But these kids would say things like, I don't need to see Dr. Lisa. I don't need to be tested. My friends, quote unquote, friends, don't want me to see her. And some of the kids, I would ask them why. And child A is one that I asked why. If you read in the blogs, you know all about child A. Child A would tell me, because you believe in angels. Which is very true of me. Since I was a child, I've always liked God's angels. I've always been fascinated by them, and I don't know why, but I've always liked looking at books and pictures about angels. So, but I want you to understand, that's private information that I just revealed about myself, and there's nothing wrong with it, but I'm pretty guarded with my clients. So when they know private information about me, it's always shocking to me. Now, you can Google me and find out whatever you want about me, but what you won't find is private information. And that's not something that I disclose to my clients either. For example, I never have pictures of my family in my offices. So for this little kid to tell me, well, you love angels, I have no evidence anywhere of loving angels. So I remember that day, and I said to this child, yes, that's a true statement about me. Yes, I like angels. I do. I think they're beautiful. They're fascinating, just in different literature. And so when I thought about what this kid said, because that wasn't the first time I heard that these ghosts that they're seeing didn't like me. These kids didn't come back. They may have come back once or twice, but they didn't eventually come back for therapy. And I remember child A's mother sharing with me that child A really didn't want to come and see me anymore, realizing that I didn't do anything to child A. There were some parents who would get overly fascinated by their nebulous children to the point where they would allow what they can see to dominate. Does that make sense? So even if the parents couldn't see ghosts, the kids could. And some parents were so fascinated by it and so happy about the gift that they would almost forget to be parents. They would rely on what the kids would see. So if some of the kids would say, some of you are interested in gender, these are mostly boys that I'm talking about. So if some of the kids would say, some of the boys would say, I don't need to see Dr. Lisa. The ghosts tell me I'm fine. I don't need her. Parents would cave to it and they wouldn't come back. Wouldn't come back. And so, that's when I failed, because I was still learning about, what I needed to do. And honestly, kids in your care, even when you're in the school, you cover them and you protect them in the schools and you do everything you can to help them in school. It's the same thing we do as psychologists. I did everything I could to keep them as my clients. I, wanted to continue to work, for example, with child A, but it just wasn't happening. And so you have to let them go. There's nothing you can do when they go home. So as much as this kid and I talked about not talking to these things, how you demand them go away, you pray over yourself, everything that I knew what to do with this particular child A didn't want to do. It was fun. It was exciting. Child A was the only one in the home that can see these things. Child A talked to them. Child A proved to me that what was seen is true. This was fun to child A, for example. So that was one of the kids I actually lost. So that never feels good, but it happens. But what it taught me back then was that I had to learn more about how I manage that negativity, how I could be almost a dominant influence on these kids with regard to keeping them in therapy with me, because I knew that I can help them at that point. But sometimes you lose them and you just have to let it go. So in that case, with that particular child, I did let that baby go. And I don't know what happened to child A after that day. The good news is that, with that kid, the mother was very supportive of this child and this child's ability, and also shared with me that they left on good terms. There was nothing wrong. This child just is defiant and refuses to come. So there you go. So there were times when these ghosts were stronger than me and they would win. Yep. They were stronger and they would win these kids. And unfortunately, what these kids were talking to were demons. So I was very nervous actually about what happened with child A. And child A is an interesting story. It's an interesting story. So when you get a chance, read up on that one. And I will be talking about that one pretty soon, because child A was fascinating to me. All right. So there was a pastor's wife in my life as well. And I was told by that wife and also by my pastor at the time that I needed to have a Bible in my office. And I wasn't taught that in school, guys, not at all. I was actually told the opposite. And then when you work in a school, you can't mix church and state. So, but this was a private company and I wasn't in the school. So, after child A, I started to keep a Bible in my office. And that is a long, detailed story that I will get into over time. But the reason that I was told is because I had lost child A, and child A kept telling me that there were lots of dark angels in my office. And the people who cared about me and who surrounded me, who understood what was happening more than I did, told me, you've got to put a Bible in your office. You have got to start being more active biblically, even if it's just in your office. These dark angels are harmful. And I don't know if I told you all this, but at the time when I met, for example, child A, I was very pregnant. When I say very, I mean probably 7 months pregnant. So on my way to maternity leave. So a lot of this too was to protect me and my health. So it just got really stressful and over my head because I am no one's pastor and I can't see ghosts. So I'm just, if you had to process all of this, just imagine how I felt at the time. And children kept sharing with me that these dark angels were outside of my window in my office. They were outside of the door. They were coming into the building. I have a lot of experiences that I share throughout my blog with dark angels, which is dark angels is the term that kids use. And so some of the kids were getting scared because they didn't like the fact that there were so many dark angels. So I had to sip a glass of wine on that one because I remember that like it was yesterday too, where the kids were getting scared. And so when they were getting scared, I would have to literally show them that I had a Bible in the room. And I kid you not, that would decrease some of the fear that these babies had. And so at that point, I had learned to pray. I had learned to cleanse my office in prayer. Some people say use sage. I didn't do that. Because I'm a chicken sometimes when it comes to stuff. And so I'm like, I'm not breathing sage when I'm 7 months pregnant. That's probably like smoking weed or something. And I'm not going to do it. So I'm just going to pray and screw that sage. And, yeah, when you're pregnant, your mind is on a totally different type of plane. But that was my perception of sage back then. Right now, I'm like, give me some sage. I'll light up the room with some sage at this point. So that's what I did. I cleansed my office. I asked God, I'll tell you my prayer. It's a prayer that I use in every company that I work for because the theory I have now, 20 years later, is that I am going to come across another nebulous child. So no matter where I am, when I work with children, Dr. Lisa says a prayer. And what I pray about is protection, safety, removing all dark angels or any other demons within my vicinity, within the vicinity of the children, and watch over the kids. Totally, I completely cleanse. Okay. And I do that now. And I kept the Bible in my office for 20 years. I always have the same Bible in my office. I learned so much. It does not matter if you don't believe in God. If you come and see me, I don't push my religious beliefs off on anyone. But I'll tell you one thing, I've dealt with too many kids that can see demons. So I'm always going to have a Bible. And I always cleanse the space. So, once I started doing that, let me tell you what happened. Some amazing stuff happened. these same kids who were scared would come into my office without anxiety. And I'm asking them, well, what happened? What's different? Your office feels safe. It's safe with you. I feel as if the air is not heavy in here. I feel as if the air is clean. There are no dark angels in here. And I was like, if you can see my face now, it's the exact face that I had back then. It's a face of, really? Because I can't see this stuff. Keep that in mind. But I do believe that these things work. And I had to do something to get the anxiety down for these kids. It's not always medication. I don't jump on the medication bandwagon. For my history, I do whatever it takes for kids before we even have to go that route with medication. And guess what? What I did worked. There were parents who could see ghosts who said, there are no dark angels in here. The other thing I was told was the room is full of angels. That's a whole different story. We're going to talk about how I understood that they were truly angels of God. That's not for today. That's a whole different story. We'll get to it. That's how I knew that it worked. The office was less heavy. Whew. That was fascinating for me. I'm sure you can imagine why, because I can't see anything happening. But when the parents confirmed with me that the office was better, I knew I was onto something. But I also felt weird. I laugh at myself. I was so young back then. I felt weird. You know, it was weird because I can't see these things. I do believe, and I still believe, and I believe in everything that I'm telling you. But this whole thing felt weird to me. And it felt weird, not just because I couldn't see what was happening, but these parents and kids confirmed that when I cleansed the building and the office space, that it actually worked. I was like, wow, what kind of power is this? So I just felt like Wonder Woman or something. I was like, I have the power. Clack, clack. Some of you probably don't even remember Wonder Woman because you're too young. Clack, clack. She used to clap her wrist. That's how I felt. So it was definitely very comforting. The other reason that it felt weird, though, is because I didn't have that biblical knowledge. Not at all. I didn't have that background in pastoral studies. I didn't know. It's kind of like people tell you to pray, and you're kind of like, is it going to work? Or who am I praying to? Well, I can't see God, so how is this real? It kind of felt like that. Even if you do believe, it was very surreal because the kids and the families were even fathers at that point were saying, well, yeah, I'm a lot more comfortable because of what you did when you asked to clean the room out. You demanded them to go, so they're not here. And I'm like, wow, these big burly dads are telling me, yeah, I feel safe now. I'm like, really? If you guys saw me, you would know I'm only 5'4". So these big burly dads are like, yeah, there are no dark angels in here. It's pretty safe now. I'm like, wow, this stuff really works. Okay. So from that, I had to start thinking in terms of what I wasn't taught in my clinical psych program, because I was not taught any of this stuff. So I had to start changing my focus. That's when I started changing my focus, and I changed it to what are they continuously or consistently seeing, right? Now, this was outside of therapy. So what are these kids consistently seeing? How can I prove to the public? Some of these kids have said to me over and over again, one day I want you to tell our story to the public. How am I going to get the public on board with this? How am I going to get them to believe me if I can't put it together? So what I did was I started to document. And guys, I still have my documentation. I still have all those psych reports. I still have everything. I've lost some of the pictures that the kids would draw for me, but I'm going to start collecting them again very soon when I can. So it became clear to me really quickly that I had to start data collection. I had to start that because without knowing one another, these kids had the same story. And I'll tell you what, every kid called a demon with wings a dark angel. Every single one of them. And the funny thing is somebody had, I think, wrote on my blog that they've heard of dark angels before. And then if you Google, if you get bored and you want to prove me wrong, which you can't, Google dark angels and you'll see tons of people just talking about, yeah. You know, some demons are very beautiful. Remember, they're fallen angels, according to the Bible. So it would make sense that kids would see them as dark angels because they are fallen angels, right? They're just demons. So I want you to take away from this that I had a whole lot of learning and studying. I had a whole lot of time, especially when I was, after I delivered my son and I, had time to really process it and think about it. These kids were telling me the same stuff over and over again. And what I want to talk about next week is how I felt about no matter where I was, and this is true today, and nebulous children find me. And I know why, according to some of them. So I will tell you why next week, why these kids find me. That was a huge question because think about it. If you're in school for clinical psychology or school psychology or whatever you're in school for, and just at random, kids keep coming to you, telling you that they see ghosts, at some point you're going to think, why are you all coming to me? How come you can't go to other therapists? Why do you want to talk to me? I don't see ghosts. I don't know how to do this, right? You would start probably kind of questioning why the heck these kids keep coming to you, or what kind of gift, if you will, that you have that draw these kids to you. And it was child B, that family, and it was also a couple of other children. E in particular talked to me extensively why nebulous children come to me. So we are going to start out with that next week. If you want to add any comments or questions, please feel free to do so. I'm open to hearing from you. Again, you can reach me at kidscanseeghosts@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at Dr. Lisa 1959. I am on Instagram, Kids Can See Ghosts. Can you? Gosh, I'm everywhere. I'm actually, starting a lot of different things on Quora as well. I have a Quora page. You can catch me on there. A lot of people ask me questions on there. Also, they ask me private questions sometimes as well. My Google Voice number again is 765-205-1959. So it was great talking to you all today. I will catch you next week and we will finish up Blog 5 next Wednesday. Have a good night. Dr. Lisa out.